Have you ever felt like the whole world turned its back on you the moment you began to live authentically? A close friend suddenly grows distant. Coworkers act cold. Family starts criticizing you, as if your growth is a threat to them. You don't know why. You haven't done anything wrong, yet resentment quietly takes root like a shadow following every step forward. Carl Jung, the great psychologist of the 20th century, once said, "The most painful thing is not being hated by others, but realizing that their hatred comes from their fear of the parts of themselves they've never dared to face." When you begin your journey of growth, you don't just change yourself. You accidentally illuminate the darkness in others. And not everyone is ready for that light. That's when the shadow, the buried part of the soul, reacts. They don't realize they're angry at you, not because you're wrong, but because you've touched a part of them they've been avoiding. They project their insecurity, disappointment, and rejected dreams onto you. And you, the one brave enough to break the mold, become an unwanted mirror of truths they don't want to see. In this video, we'll go deep into Carl Jung's psychology's shadow projection, persona individuation, and the transcendent function to understand why the more you grow, the lonelier it can feel, and why that loneliness isn't a sign you're lost, but proof that you're becoming your true self. Yet there's a crucial truth most people overlook. Your transformation doesn't just affect you, it shakes the archetypes living in other people's minds. When you step out of the nice girl role, you might destroy the mother archetype that a friend projected onto you. When you stop being the one who always sacrifices, your family may feel like you've betrayed the savior archetype they expected. You're not just walking out of your own role, you are collapsing the symbolic world that others unconsciously live in. And what happens then? The collective through the collective unconscious tries to pull you back, not because you're wrong, but because your growth forces them to ask a scary question. If she can change, why can't I? This resistance may come as criticism, exclusion, or cold silence. But if you're grounded, self-aware, and deeply connected to the self, the wholeness within that transcends the fragile ego, you will no longer be dragged into their judgment. This journey is not for the faint of heart. It's for those brave enough to ask, who am I if I no longer live to please others? And that is where the shadow work begins. So let us go deep into the darkness, not to fear it, but to learn how to face it. Because only when you dare to look at the shadow can your inner light rise. And once that light burns bright enough, no hatred can ever put it out. The mirror that reflects what others don't want to see. Every step you take toward the light, whether it's a brave decision, a boundary you set, or simply living more authentically, can make others uncomfortable. But why? Why is your kindness misunderstood? Why does your growth become a thorn in someone else's eye? The answer doesn't lie in your actions. It lies in the shadow you're unknowingly casting upon them. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the dark part of the psyche where we store the traits. We reject jealousy, fear of failure, selfishness, unacknowledged desires. When you live authentically, you unintentionally shine light into those dark corners of others. You become a mirror, and to someone not ready to face the truth, the mirror always feels like a threat. Have you ever experienced this? You start exercising, caring for your mental health, learning to say no, and suddenly your loved ones grow distant. You chase an old dream, and your friends make passive-aggressive jokes. You live fully without asking for permission, and suddenly feel like a stranger to those you used to be close with. But this rejection isn't because you've done something wrong. It's because you dared to do what they're afraid to confront. They don't hate you, they hate the part of themselves they haven't become. Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But instead of seizing that opportunity, most people project. They throw what they can't accept about themselves onto you and call it, you've changed. Here's a story that might feel familiar. Your name is Linda. For years, you were the nice, helpful friend who never said no. But after beginning your healing journey, you start declining requests that drain your energy. You prioritize your mental well-being. And what happens? A close friend calls you selfish, cold, not the same person anymore. In truth, they're reacting to their own shadow. The part that feels guilty for never setting boundaries. The part that envies your courage to do what they cannot. They don't realize your no is not a betrayal. It's a sign that you are healing. So how do you survive this invisible war without losing yourself? The first step is awareness. You must recognize when you're being pulled into the whirlpool of projection. When someone unfairly criticizes you, pause and ask, is this their fear or flaw being projected onto me? Once you recognize this, you'll stop being wounded by emotions that were never yours to carry. The second step, face your own shadow. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." If you haven't made peace with your own shadow, your fear of being unloved, your feeling of not being enough, your repressed anger, then others' criticism will hit your unhealed wounds and shake your sense of self. Try this simple exercise. Write down a recent situation where you felt hurt because someone turned their back on you. List the emotions you felt. Then ask, what were they trying to avoid in themselves? And more importantly, am I reacting from an old fear that still lives inside me? By stepping out of unconscious reaction, you enter the light of awareness, where you are no longer ruled by old wounds and no longer hurt by the shadows of others. This isn't easy. There will be loneliness. Because mirrors not only reflect the shadow in others, they also show you who you truly are. But in that raw honesty, you become free. Yet there's a deeper layer not often discussed. Every human carries archetypes, primordial symbols of consciousness. When you step out of your old role, the kind one, the giver, the quiet listener, you're not just changing behavior, you're dismantling an archetype that someone else had projected onto you. You didn't just upset them by changing, you shook the psychological structure they depended on. That's why their reaction feels intense. They feel like they've lost control, like a child whose favorite blanket was taken away. Here's the key few people understand. Others' reactions often don't come from their adult self, but from the wounded child inside them clinging to familiarity. You can see them as part of the old system or as another soul wrestling with their shadow. When you understand this, you can place compassion next to your boundaries, and that is true power. And if you're feeling lost on this journey, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. This is a space for souls who are growing. Leave a simple line, "I'm learning not to apologize for being myself." That message could empower someone else walking through their own darkness. In the next part, we'll explore the persona, the mask you're taking off. Why does the world feel betrayed when you stop being the people pleaser? And how do you build a new persona, not to please society, but to serve your soul? Let's continue this journey, because on the other side of the shadow is the light you've never seen before. When the mask no longer fits the face within, there comes a moment in your growth journey you'll never forget. When you realize the mask you once wore to be loved, accepted, praised, now feels suffocating. It's too tight. You can't breathe. You can't smile with your whole heart. You can't cry with your full depth. You start to feel like a stranger performing in your own life. And then a quiet voice within whispers, it's time to take it off. Carl Jung called that mask the persona, the social self we construct to adapt to the outer world. The persona isn't bad. In fact, it's a necessary bridge between us and society. But the trouble begins when we forget that it's just a mask. When we identify with it, we lose the voice of the soul. And when you begin to take it off, when you're no longer the sweet one, the reliable one, the one who never complains, the world around you panics. Why? Because others became more familiar with your mask than with your true face. Imagine you're Rachel. For years, you were the nice girl. You said yes when you wanted to scream no. You smiled while your heart was breaking. You became the healer for everyone, friends, partners, coworkers. They poured their sadness, anger, frustration into you. You became an emotional dumpster. But one day you were exhausted. You began setting boundaries. You began speaking your truth. Suddenly, those who once called you a light began calling you selfish, cold change. But the truth is you haven't changed. You're simply returning the mask they were used to seeing. And what they find disturbing isn't you. It's the fact that they no longer know how to engage with the real version of you. So what's the deeper issue here? This society, from a very young age, teaches us that to be loved, we must become a certain version of ourselves. The good child, the easy friend, the patient wife, the strong husband. We are conditioned to wear masks to survive. And slowly we start believing the mask is who we are. But Jung warned, if you live too long in the persona, you won't know who you are once it's gone. And that is the existential crisis so many of us face. As we awaken, we realize we've been living someone else's life just to be loved. Take a pause and ask yourself, what is my persona? What role have I had to play to be accepted? Am I still keeping up that role because I fear something? What might happen if I take off the mask and live authentically? These are not easy questions. But if you are brave enough to ask them, you're already entering the sacred depth of individuation, the process of becoming your truest self. As Jung said, there is no real growth without taking off the mask. But there's something even deeper we need to understand. Persona is not just a role you play, it's a symbol others attach to you. When you're seen as the savior, people unconsciously place you in the healer archetype. When you're always strong, you become their image of the warrior. These archetypes live in the collective unconscious, and when you step out of the role, you disrupt the safe image in someone else's psyche. They no longer know how to relate to you because the internal image they relied on has collapsed. They'll try to pull you back with guilt, anger, silence, or rejection. But you can't be a symbol for others if it costs you your soul. So what's the way forward? It's not to destroy the persona, but to rebuild it consciously. Persona should never be a prison. It should be a garment you choose to wear, flexible, truthful, and aligned with your soul. When you learn to perform a role without identifying with it, you achieve psychological freedom. You can be a strong leader and compassionate. You can be a loving mother and still have your own dreams. You can say, I disagree, and still stay connected with grace. Now let's open a space for sharing. What is the old persona you're beginning to let go of? What feels most difficult about living more truthfully? The comment section below is a safe space, no mask, no judgment. Because when you share your truth, you give someone else the courage to take off theirs. In the next part, we'll explore an even deeper dimension. Individuation, the journey home to your authentic self. If taking off the persona is the beginning, individuation is the grand path where you no longer live to be accepted, but to fully embody your soul. Let's keep walking, because behind the mask, a soul is waiting to be seen. When you become yourself and lose the people who loved your mask, there's a strange kind of pain that shows up during the awakening journey, not from heartbreak, not from failure, but from the opposite. You're becoming the truest version of yourself, and those you love most begin to walk away. Why? Carl Jung called it individuation, a deep psychological and spiritual process, where you slowly peel away the layers of your socialized ego and begin to approach the self, the whole authentic you. But individuation is not just an inner journey, it sets off a chain reaction in the world around you. When you change, your entire ecosystem is challenged. You're no longer the people pleaser, the peacekeeper, the one who endures in silence. You begin to live as an independent being, no longer addicted to approval like a drug. And that very shift makes those who depended on your old role feel betrayed. They don't resist because you've become worse. They resist because you no longer belong to them in the old way. Imagine this. You're part of an invisible web made of expectations, roles, obligations, and beliefs woven by family, culture, community. When you dare to step out of that web, you don't just leave. You shake the entire structure. You remind others of a choice they once refused to live truthfully. Individuation is full of paradox. The more you become yourself, the more you lose those who only love the version of you that wasn't. The deeper you walk into your authentic being, the more your old relationships feel like dead skin, once protective, now suffocating your growth. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." What he didn't say, but you'll feel, is that when you live authentically, you become the light. And light makes those who live in shadow feel exposed. They won't say you're growing, they'll say you're selfish. You've changed, you're not you anymore. And there you'll stand facing two choices. Return to the acceptable version of yourself to keep the love you've known, or keep becoming who you are, even if loneliness is the price. But there's a deeper layer that few people talk about. Individuation doesn't just challenge your personal roles. It threatens the entire system of archetypes that others once saw you as. You may have been the good child, the savior, the listener. Each of those identities became a psychological pillar for someone else's belief system. When you step out of the role, they don't just lose you, they lose their sense of control. And in that panic, they try to pull you back. Not because they're cruel, but because they don't know how to live without the version of you they depended on. How do you survive this phase without losing your heart? You learn to stay centered in what Jung called the self, the greater, more whole I that is no longer entangled in roles, praise, or others' gaze. When you connect with the self, you no longer need approval, not because you don't need others, but because you've tapped into your inner source. From that place, you can love without needing control. You can give without needing validation. You can continue your journey quietly, even if those you love don't understand. Here's a gentle practice. Write down 5 roles you've played in your relationships. Archetype, the caretaker, the peacemaker, the reliable one. Ask yourself, am I holding this role out of love or fear of losing love? Ask again, if I stop playing this role, who might react the most? Then write a letter. You don't need to send it to that person. Not to justify yourself, but to express the truth that you're learning how to live authentically. You'll find in those written words a part of yourself being born. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. Share in the comments. What role are you letting go of? Have you ever been abandoned for being real? This community is a space for the brave. When you tell your story, you give strength to others walking their own path. And in that sharing, we create a new web not made of roles, but of truth. In the next episode, we'll go even deeper. The collective unconscious. Why the system itself reacts when you leave the roles it assigned you. You'll begin to see that you're not just confronting individuals. You're confronting a culture, a belief system, and thousands of years of invisible conditioning. Keep going with me, because the deeper you go, the closer you come to real freedom. The collective unconscious, when the system can't handle your freedom. Have you ever felt that the more authentically you live, it's not just one person, but the entire world that seems to turn against you? Not just your friends, not just your family, but your entire community. Even the social norms and values you once trusted begin to shake. That feeling is not paranoia, it's the collective unconscious responding. Carl Jung described a deep layer of the psyche that transcends the individual. He called it the collective unconscious. This is the realm where ancient archetypes live, primordial patterns passed down through generations rooted deep in the human psyche: the mother, the warrior, the savior, the rebel. And here's what most people miss. When you begin to break free from the role an archetype represents, you're not just leaving a relationship, you're challenging the symbolic system that society depends on. Imagine you're Emily. From a young age, you were taught that a woman's worth lies in being gentle, self-sacrificing, and compliant. You entered adulthood with a sweet smile and a polite yes. But at 35, something awakened. You didn't want to be just a mother. You were also an artist, a leader, a voice of your own. You started writing, painting, saying no to sacrifices you never truly agreed to. And what happened? It wasn't just your husband who grew uneasy. Your family judged you, your religious community disapproved, even your close female friends pulled away. Why? Because you were challenging an archetype, the obedient woman. And the collective unconscious doesn't take that lightly. This goes deeper than individual resistance. Society operates on invisible roles. When one person breaks their role, it creates a crack in the system. That's why people who live authentically are often ostracized, not just by individuals, but by the collective villages, communities, media, social networks. Have you seen this happen? A woman chooses not to have children and is labeled selfish. A man refuses to be the sole provider and is seen as weak. Someone leaves their religion to follow their inner truth and is called a traitor. These aren't moral failings. They're the immune response of the collective unconscious trying to pull them back into the mold. Jung understood this early on. He wrote, "The awakened individual becomes a threat to the slumbering collective, not because they're bad, but because they expose the system's illusions." And the first reaction of the collective unconscious is not curiosity, it's suppression. So how do you continue your journey without being pulled back? You must understand the resistance of the collective is not proof that you're wrong. It's a signal that you're stepping into a kind of freedom most people fear. You don't need to destroy the system, you just need to not be absorbed by it. Live like a quiet island of truth. No need to shout, just stand firm. Sometimes your mere presence, with bright eyes and an authentic life, is the most powerful act of rebellion. Here's a deeper truth few people recognize. The collective unconscious doesn't just react to your actions, it reacts to your energy. When you become whole, integrate your shadow, dismantle the persona, reconnect with the self. You radiate a different frequency. That frequency shakes the foundations of those who've never dared look inward. It's as if you're silently saying, "I choose a different path." And without a word, old structures begin to tremble. So you are not alone. Countless souls are walking this path quietly. Share in the comments. Have you ever faced community, societal, or systemic resistance just for being true to yourself? How did you overcome it? This community isn't about right or wrong, it's about seeing each other at the deepest level of courage. When you share, you don't just support others, You deepen the crack in the old system so that something more real can finally be born. In the next part, we'll reach a pivotal point, the transcendent function, where you no longer have to choose between pleasing others and being true to yourself. You'll learn to integrate both poles to step into a new way of being. This is no longer just healing, it's transformation. And from here, the journey doesn't go farther outward. It goes deeper within. Transcendent function, the door between two worlds, when you no longer have to choose between being true to yourself or being loved by others. There comes a moment on the path of inner growth when you realize you no longer want to fight the world, but you also don't want to shrink just to be accepted. You no longer want to shout, "I'm different, I'm different," but you also don't want to stay silent just to blend in. You're standing on the edge between two forces. On one side, the desire to be true to yourself. On the other, the longing for connection. And you wonder, is it possible to be fully myself and not be alone? Carl Jung called this the transcendent function, a psychological bridge between opposites. It is not compromise. It is a sacred inner union, where the conscious ego and the unconscious, two opposing poles, learn to coexist, not cancel each other out. Jung believed that if we are brave enough to face both our light and our shadow, a third path will open. Not either or, but both and. The transcendent function doesn't arise from logic. It is born from conflict, fully accepted. You want to be loved but not betray yourself. You want to be seen but hate pretending. You are torn. But if you dare to stay with that tension without rushing to escape, something miraculous begins to unfold. A new way of being is born. It's like a dream where you're being chased, and instead of running, you stop, turn around, and face what's hunting you. In that moment, you're no longer prey. You're not yet the hunter. You've stepped beyond. You are no longer just reacting. You become the clear-eyed observer. A real-life example. Your name is Ethan. You've spent your life trying not to disappoint anyone. You're kind, easygoing, loved by all, but you feel empty. Each time you say yes when you mean no, you leave a piece of yourself behind. Eventually, you begin to speak your truth, even when it makes others uncomfortable, and guilt shows up. You feel like a betrayer, like you're hurting people. You're caught between two poles. Hold on to kindness or hold on to yourself. But the transcendent function doesn't ask you to choose sides. It asks you to stay with the paradox long enough to realize you can speak truth with love. You can hold your boundaries without losing your compassion. Truth doesn't need to shout, and compassion doesn't require pretending. But let's go deeper. The transcendent function isn't just about inner harmony. It is the bridge that leads to the self, the wholeness of your being. When you learn to hold both your light and your darkness, and without denying either, you enter a sacred depth of existence. You're no longer a good person or a bad one, awakened or asleep. You are simply a full-spectrum human, alive, learning, stumbling, rising. And the most beautiful part, from that center, you connect more deeply with others than ever before. No longer needing to please, no longer needing to persuade, just being raw and real, and letting your soul speak for itself. Here's a practice you can try. Write down 2 inner conflicts you're holding. For example, I want to be loved versus I want freedom. Instead of choosing, they write a dialogue between the 2 parts. Ask each one, what are you trying to protect me from? Then reread it. Can you spot a deeper need that lies beneath both voices? That deeper layer is where the transcendent function is forming. Share with the community. What inner contradictions are you standing between right now? Have you ever had a moment when you didn't choose a side but suddenly saw everything more clearly? Your words don't just help you clarify your truth. They may help someone else somewhere feel seen. This is a place for deep souls to meet, not to teach, but to travel together. And if you've made it this far, prepare for the final chapter of this journey. How do you keep living fully when you have changed but the world hasn't? This is where you must learn to create a life that flows from the inside out. A life where you no longer ask for permission to be who you truly are. A new chapter is unfolding, and it begins in the silence deep within you. If you've made it this far, please pause for a moment. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, how many times have I abandoned myself just to receive applause from others? How many times have I tried to please the world while my heart quietly bled? Maybe you had no guide. Maybe no one ever validated your growth. Maybe you felt like a lone traveler walking through the night. But you know what? It's exactly in that darkness that your inner light begins to shine for the first time. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And you, the one reading these words, you're beginning to walk that path. A path with no red carpet, no fireworks, just quiet footsteps, leading you back to your soul. You've dared to look at your shadow. You've begun to strip away the persona. You've walked through the pain of individuation. You've moved through the resistance of the collective unconscious. And now at the end of this journey, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to exist, fully, without shrinking, without asking for permission. You are a keeper of the light, not because you're perfect, but because you no longer run from yourself. Every step you take becomes an invisible message to the world. There is a more authentic way to live. You don't need to shout, you just need to live truthfully, and that energy will ripple outward like waves. Someone will see you, and in you, they'll see themselves. Let this video be more than just information. Let it be the beginning of a community. Please comment below. What part of your inner growth journey has hurt the most, but also made you the most proud? We're here not to fix each other, but to awaken together. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep walking this path, where every video is a journey into the deepest layers of your soul, where every word is a reminder. You are not alone. You are a soul returning home. And if you don't see anyone waiting to welcome you, remember this: you with your love and your courage are the one who lit the first light.